Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and today we're going to be talking through some fantasy football running back tiers here for our 2022 redraft fantasy football leagues. We're going to be diving into my top 24 running backs right now and separating them into 6 different tier groups and talking through how I see these guys and their outlooks for this upcoming fantasy football season. So, of course, if you're new around here, as always, make sure to drop down, leave today's episode with a like. It helps me out a lot. And click that subscribe button. We want to try and grow the SFS community here. So the more people we've got watching videos, interacting in the comment section, by all means, if you have fantasy football questions, please put those down below or check out the community Discord server. The invite link to that is in the description of today's episode. Free to join. Takes just a couple clicks. You can pop in there and ask me any questions day or night related to any videos or your team personally, dynasty, redraft, all that great stuff. It's a good time in there. So thank you guys for tuning in. We're going to be talking through things in an orderly fashion today. We'll be starting with the elite tier and making our way down throughout the board. Again, these are my top 24 running backs at this point in time for redraft purposes. So you can just kind of take a peek at those faces there and familiarize yourself with those. But I'm going to break down the tiers before we dive into the actual players. Just kind of explain what that group or groups mean to me. And then eventually we're going to start putting some players in there. So the elite tier is the best of the best. These obviously, this should be the easiest tier to guess. These are the guys that are going at the top of fantasy drafts right now. And for reasons, again, that are quite obvious. Best producers, highest ceiling, and have the best fantasy track records for success. And then obviously the expectation that success can be translated into this season. 1A is going to be the category just below those top-end guys, players who I think have elite level upside. I'm not quite sure if they have it in the books this year to finish as the number 1 overall fantasy football running back, but it's certainly a possibility, but I'm giving them an outside chance. The 1B category, these are going to be guys that I definitely don't see finishing as the RB1 overall, but still have legitimate top 12 value, and that's, at the end of the day, still very impressive and something that's very hard to do. Finding top 12 running backs in fantasy football can be quite the stressful task. So at the very least, these are names that you should have some value and will probably come with a high draft day price tag in your leagues. The RB1 bubble, this is something I've kind of been messing around with, is the running back 1, running back 2 on the wide receiver episode we just posted the other day. Make sure to go check that out after you watch this video. The wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 bubbles, these are essentially players that walk the fine line of you're on the cusp and you have a very legitimate, real opportunity, a chance, a situation that puts you in a realistic spot for success, but there's also enough red flags or inconsistent play throughout their careers. Whatever the case might be, we'll talk about each unique scenario here, but there's also a very legitimate reason why they could wildly fail to reach expectations and have an underwhelming season. And ultimately, those might be guys you want to stay away from depending on their draft price. But that's something we'll talk through in our drafts once we get those kicked up and started again next week. I actually have some exciting news for you guys that I want to break next week. That's why we haven't been posting drafts a couple of days here. I've been in conversations with a partner here for the SFS channel, so I'm excited to get you guys more information on that. If you want a sneak peek, I'll probably put something in the Discord server about that this weekend, so go check that out again. The invite link is in the description of today's episode. Maybe I'll pin it in the comment section, but I've been pushing the Twitter pretty hard here lately. So the first name in the elite tier, again, this should be the easiest tier to guess, is Jonathan Taylor. For me, I think it's a fairly safe thing to say that with the ADP being 1.1 overall on Underdog Fantasy Football right now for their best ball ADP, it's safe to assume you can put him in the elite category. Obviously, the RB1 finisher a season ago had 372 touches, so you're getting insanely elite volume there. He's got a top offensive line, especially on the interior with Quentin Nelson and Ryan Kelly, again, moving guys out of the way on the interior of that Colts blocking scheme. 20 total touchdowns a season ago is also something that I think is highly impressive. Obviously, touchdown production is something that can be a bit inconsistent, and it's hard to replicate. Again, 20 TDs on a year-to-year basis. He could see upwards of a 50% touchdown regression. He did have 12 in his rookie year in 2020. But again, TDs are something that come and go, and for most players, unless we're talking like Devontae Adams as a Packer, touchdown production can be, again, wildly sporadic and not something that can be depended on year over year. He did have the easy lead for red zone touches this year, which is how I think he got such a high number. 92 touches inside the 20-yard line, and then had 20 carries on the goal line. So Jonathan Taylor was getting the best of the best volume. Those numbers ranked number 1 overall at the running back position, and his opportunity was unmatched in that area of the field. And additionally, you've got 53 targets out of the backfield with Nyheim Hines, who is a pass-catching specialist. And kind of a funny note, Frank Reich the other day actually said that you should draft Nyheim Hines in your fantasy leagues this year. So take that with a grain of salt. But Jonathan Taylor did, again, have 53 targets. So some very good utilization in the passing game as well for one of the most prolific rushing threats in the league. CMC is the other guy I'm going to throw up there now. CMC obviously has a lot more of a polarizing crowd here. Super risky, but what we know is that when Christian McCaffrey is healthy, when he's out there on the football field and playing football games, he's fantastic. And I would argue that his skill set as a football player gives him a higher fantasy ceiling than Jonathan Taylor's does. Now, he's only played 10 games in the last 2 seasons. That's a humongous red flag. That's literally less than half of the games total for the last 2 years combined. However, in those last 2 seasons, when he's been healthy in PPR formats, he's averaged 24.15 fantasy points per game across those 10 contests. So, small sample size, but you're also talking about a guy who's finished as the RB1 overall before. He is catching a ridiculous volume of passes, getting a ridiculous amount of work in the run department, getting the goal line carries in Carolina. Obviously, the situational side of things with having Sam Darnold as the quarterback, not ideal. The Panthers' offensive ceiling, not ideal. But you're getting a lot to work with here, and CMC has that ideal dream scenario skill set at the running back position. So we're going to go in the 1A category now. I'm going to talk through Austin Eckler, who very well could have saw his fantasy peak a season ago in 2021. He had a great year, 20 total touchdowns, 21.5 fantasy points per game. So we just talked about McCaffrey averaging 24.15 over a 10-game span. Austin Eckler was able to do that over the course of last season. 15.1% target share in the Chargers offense. That is phenomenal. Really, when you start to get 12% or more of a target share as a running back, you're talking about a really healthy amount of your team's offense. Now, once we start to push higher and higher in terms of, Eckler getting to that 15.1% marker, especially in an offense with a super high ceiling, again, with Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams catching passes, you've got a lot more opportunity to score points and put points up on the scoreboard as opposed to Sam Darnold and the Carolina Panthers. And the other thing you love to see here is, again, receiving involvement gives efficiency to the running back position, and Austin Eckler was number 2 in routes run for RBs last year. So you're seeing all the things you want to. These are tremendous green flags. Again, like I talked about with JT scoring his 20 total TDs, Austin Eckler had 20 total touchdowns. And that is something that very well could be split in half this next year, depending on what happens. Now, if you want to talk about JT and make that argument, I would say maybe that's a little bit more likely because although I think Matt Ryan stabilizes that offense, he's been pretty bad historically over the last few years in the red zone, not putting up great touchdown numbers for Kyle Pitts, Julio Jones. I think he's actually had a handful. I'd have to actually fact check this and go look this up. Didn't necessarily plan on going down this rabbit hole, but I believe he's had a decent amount of turnovers in the red zone as well. But overall, I think the stabilization between Matt Ryan and Carson Wentz is a positive for the Colts. But if there was someone who would see steady touchdown production and maybe has a chance to score 15 to 16 TDs, I would argue it would be Eckler over Jonathan Taylor because of, again, the offensive structure that he's playing for and just the overall upside I think that Herbert gives that Chargers offense. Now, Derrick Henry's the next player I want to put up here. So you've got kind of some red flags with everyone on the list, whether it's touchdown regression, injuries. Derrick Henry's coming off of his first major career injury with the foot issue he had last year. He only played half the games. He came back for the divisional round playoff game against the Cincinnati Bengals this past season, and he played in that one. So did Deontay Foreman. They did okay. It was nothing phenomenal. He had a couple nice runs, but it wasn't traditional King Henry just bulldozing through people and having 100-plus yard rushing performances and all that great stuff. But in his 8 games played, in PPR, Derrick Henry had 24.2 fantasy points per game. So you're talking about insane markers, literally higher than CMC was in that 10-game stretch, higher than Austin Eckler was. Now, The sample size is only 8 games, but he did have 24.2 fantasy points per game, which again is completely absurd. 937 yards rushing, so almost a 1,000-yard rushing season in the first half of the games played. Actually, less than half of the games played, because now we're in a 17-game schedule with the 18th week factoring in the bye week. So he didn't even make it through half of his fantasy performances. Okay, I'm basically talking myself into a hole here. Yes, in some leagues, he did play half the fantasy performances. You're traditionally going to probably see guys end their leagues in week 17, whatever. Occasionally, you'll see leagues go to week 18. But the point being, 937 and 10 TDs in 8 games, whether you want to consider that half of your fantasy season or if you're playing until week 18 and it's not, whatever. The numbers are ridiculous. The offense is completely structured around Derrick Henry. Power running is how the Titans want to play offense, and they're going to pound the rock and give him absurd volume. And this is a guy who, when he gets to the second and third level of a defense, is going to punish linebackers and safeties and corners. Now, he can run defensive linemen over, and occasionally, a strong tackling defensive back that's able to get low, or a linebacker will be able to match him. But once he builds up his steam and gets his velocity moving forward, nobody wants to tackle this guy. So although he's not an elite receiving threat, and his receiving volume for those first 8 games was increasing from what we saw historically throughout the prior seasons of his career, Henry was off to a ridiculous start. There was the possibility for back-to-back 2,000-yard rushing seasons. And who knows how many more touchdowns he would have scored if he ended up playing those final 8 or 9 games for fantasy football purposes. So Dalvin Cook's the next player I want to talk through here. Cook, to me, is interesting. I think that his draft price right now is actually quite discounted. You've got Kevin O'Connell coming in, which I think is intriguing for the sense that you've got an offensive-minded head coach at the helm for the first time, and as long as I can remember, Mike Zimmer being a defensive guy and being there for, the last handful of years. And I think that, maybe we'll see, stemming from that Sean McVay tree, some more Alex Madison or some more of the other complementary backs eat in slightly to Dalvin Cook's workload. But Dalvin Cook's been a guy who you can basically pencil in for 3 to 4 missed games per year. He has never played more than 14 games in a season. So I'm not exactly sure what the exact reason is for his ADP price being a bit discounted. Again, I've been scooping him up at the 111 in 12-team leagues, especially in best ball formats. And this is still a guy who has a ridiculous ceiling, because you're talking about an offense where they've got all the weapons. Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, KJ Osborne. That's a really nice 3-headed receiving trio there. Kirk Cousins is good enough to get the job done, and their offensive line is average and gets the job done again for Dalvin Cook. And they're able to set up some blocking schemes to get him running off tackle. So I like what I see here in this Minnesota Vikings situation. It's certainly not perfect, but I do think that with the explosiveness, the caliber of player he is, he certainly belongs in this 1A tier. I don't think with those missed games he's got a chance to finish as the RB1. But this is a guy who's averaged 20 or more points in fantasy football over the course of a season twice in his career, and this past season he didn't quite get there, but he only had 6 touchdowns on the year, which is a little bit lower. So for his standards, basically. So DAndre Swift is the other guy I want to put in this category, the last guy before we move on to that 1B tier. Now, a lot of people, in terms of the Detroit Lions situation, the ceiling offensively for this Lions football team might not feel comfortable putting DAndre Swift here. I basically compared him the other day as a more talented Austin Eckler in terms of individually. You're talking about a player in DAndre Swift who coveted a second-round draft pick. His skill set was highly valued at the next level. And while Austin Eckler is certainly highly valued now, he was an undrafted player, had to make his way up the depth chart. And now we see what he can do. But in terms of, I think, overall ceiling as a individual player, DAndre Swift has the same tools that Eckler has, and maybe to an even greater extent. But the situation is not as good. He doesn't have a Justin Herbert. He doesn't have proven receivers to the extent of a Mike Williams and a Keenan Allen. Yes, Amon-Ra St. Brown had an insanely hot down the stretch performance or collection of performances for the Lions last season, and you bring in Jameson Williams, who I think those two are going to smash this year and just help raise that ceiling for Detroit offensively. But in theory, we don't know for a fact yet if that's going to be the case. However, I'm feeling pretty optimistic about the situation here. Swift has only played 13 games in his first 2 seasons, so that could be a little bit of a red flag. But super efficient in the passing game, someone that racks up a lot of points in productive ways in PPR formats. His career rushing high in his first 2 seasons is only 617 yards this past year. So it's showing you that he's having these really quality fantasy seasons as a receiving threat. He's not necessarily giving you great numbers in the rushing department. And you see that with his 18.4% target share, which ranks number 2 amongst running backs. And again, that's like 3.3% higher than Austin Eckler's was as a member of the Chargers. Now, I did talk about this yesterday. That number might go down because you're talking about divvying up more targets and passes between TJ Hawkinson. You've got Jameson Williams coming into the situation now. We'll see how Amon-Ra St. Brown's target share looks like over the duration of an entire season as a starter. But I still do, again, think that Swift is definitely going to hit that sweet spot of 13 to 15% target share and be a guy really involved in that Detroit offense. So moving into the 1B category, the first guy I'll talk about here is Alvin Kamara. Now, obviously, we've got a potential suspension, disciplinary action looming over his head. I'd be lying if I told you I knew what was going to be happening there, so I'm just going to try and ignore that as much as possible. What we've got going on here, though, is a situation that looks to be changing in a positive direction. You've got the Saints bringing in 2 big pass-catching options in Jarvis Landry and Chris Olave in the draft and free agency. And I think that helps a lot. Jameis Winston's coming off an ACL injury, and he was actually able to, I thought this was quite amazing, give Alvin Kamara the target share lead amongst running backs at 20.2% a season ago. So even after Drew Brees left, he was still getting the number 1 ranked target share. Now, that doesn't mean raw targets total, but the target share of that offense that he received was, the piece of the pie was the biggest of any other player that they got in their offense. So that's very encouraging for me. That shows that Jameis Winston, before he got injured, and the guys thereafter were getting the job done, still finding ways to get him the football, despite the fact that they are not Drew Brees. And then again, you bring in a vertical weapon like Chris Olave, you bring in another possession receiver in Jarvis Landry, and I think that this offense is trending in the right direction to be able to produce points the way we want to see. Kamara, I was surprised by this stat, still had 18.1 fantasy points per game a season ago. So in a year that was kind of a down season for him, he still managed to put up very, very respectable numbers. And last year, he saw over a 50% reduction in that touchdown percentage. Again, talking through some of those red flags you can have with the JT and Eckler. He went from 21 in the 2020 season, where he finished as the RB1 in PPR formats, to just 9 this season. So he saw a regression of 12 in that category. Joe Mixon's the next guy that's going to be joining him here. Joe finished very, very high last year. I think he's a fantastic option for this season. I just don't know how comfortable I feel with his ability to duplicate that year. He was one of those guys last season who people were saying, I won't draft him again. I'm not taking the chance. I'm not taking the risk. He's burned me too many times before. And then we see Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, these other guys that elevate the production ceiling for the Bengals offense. That directly impacts Joe Mixon's ability to get goal line carries, red zone opportunities. He was number 5 in fantasy points per game, 3rd in total carries in the National Football League. So a guy who was always a high volume player in the backfield, a workhorse, if you will. But those were more effective carries now because that offense is staying on the field longer. They're moving down the field more effectively, more efficiently. And again, you're getting more of those opportunities. He was tied for 5th in red zone carries at 50 for the season. So again, when you're in the red zone, it takes 1 carry to get 6 points. And that's how you really start to rack up that production extremely quickly. Najee Harris is the next guy I want to toss in that category. Harris is someone who I have more questions about his situation, but I know that volume's going to be there. First round pick a season ago. They want to get him the football. He led the National Football League in touches as a rookie. So they trust him. They want to give him the football. The one concern I have is between Mitchell Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, how effective is the offense going to be? Is there going to be any transition period if you start Trubisky for a month or 2 months and then move to Pickett? Is that going to kind of bog up the works and lower that efficiency rate, which was already not fantastic because the offensive line is not great, and Big Ben as a passer was no efficient player. So, I mean, they were grinding out drives even if they threw the ball 10 to 12 times a drive a season ago. So kind of crazy stuff for the Steelers there, but I think that he will have so much volume that it will be hard for him to not finish as a top 12 player, especially in PPR formats. Now I want to move into, the RB1 bubble. So this is where things get really interesting for me. So these are the, what do we got here? 9 guys that I feel very comfortable about finishing, barring injuries, if these players stay healthy for 14 plus games, 13 plus games even. I think they'll finish as top 12 players. If that's not the case, obviously that's probably not going to happen. But this bubble territory here is where I see players that have a very strong chance to finish top 12, but I think that there's also a very easy world where that is not the case. So the first guy I want to toss up there is Javonte Williams, one guy I was insanely excited for this season, but I don't think got the opportunity that we were hoping for. Melvin Gordon re-signed with the Broncos, so it's not going to be a situation where you cut him loose. He's a 3-down workhorse back, and he's killing it with Russell Wilson at the helm. That obviously Denver offensive ceiling is sky high now. You've got one of the top 5 or 6 best quarterbacks in the NFL leading that offense. Now you went from like a bottom level starter. I mean, I would say out of the 32 stars in the National Football League, Drew Lock was maybe 29th or 30th. And now you raise that ceiling and stabilize the floor as well. But for me, just looking at the rookie season numbers for Javonte Williams here, yes, he led the National Football League in broken tackles. He shows us what he can do when he gets opportunities. He's insanely capable of being an effective pass catcher, again, of imposing his will on defenses, being a goal line threat. However, he only had 49.9% of the snap share in Denver, meaning that, we'll round that up to 50%. It's a 0.1 difference there. And it's not like Melvin Gordon, got that other half because you've got other people involved in that backfield as well. But you're basically getting a 50-50 split between yourself and the other players in the offense. Now, that's great. That's fantastic. But when we want to think of you as a 1A player, we can't get there when Melvin Gordon's there. And that's just a reality of the situation that personally I had to accept the hard way. And I think that you guys should be open to as well. There's a reason that his ADP has kind of fallen back here a little bit since that re-signing, despite the fact that I think he'll be a great player. And I looked at this as well because I was very interested. So both Javonte and Melvin Gordon had 8 goal line carries apiece a season ago. So I was interested to see, is one player or the other kind of taking the step forward over the other? And that wasn't the case. It was, again, just like the snap count percentage, split right down the middle. And they're going to be sharing here, keeping each other fresh, trying to make a playoff run. It's really the best situation for the Broncos football team. But for fantasy football, it kind of sucks. Javonte, though, was 13th in running back receptions, so you are getting a pass-catching element and value there that I think should still be highly coveted. Zeke's next guy I want to toss up here. I've been talking about Zeke the last few days here. I think his ADP is ridiculously low right now for a guy who's tied for 5th in goal line carries, and there's actually 3 guys in today's video tied for 5th. 5th in red zone touches. So all 3 of these players, Joe Mixon, Zeke, and one guy we'll touch on later here, all had 50 carries in the red zone. So that being opponent's territory, 20-yard line to the goal line. And those are phenomenal opportunities. You're talking about a guy in Zeke who was not super efficient last season. He kind of limped his way to a 1,000-yard year and suffered a PCL injury, which I think played a large part in kind of his regression over the final 3 quarters of the season. In weeks 1 through 4, pre-injury, Zeke was having 20-plus touches per game. That's fantastic volume. If you're getting over 20 carries, receptions, whatever the case might be, or obviously a combination of the two, that's great volume. And he was getting, again, 20.25 touches per game before he had that PCL, but after the fact, only 15.5. So you're seeing a 4.5, 5 touch regression on a per game basis. That's going to impact your numbers. And I think that if Zeke, we saw injured for 3 quarters of the year. He didn't miss a contest, played 17 games. Now, all those games were not beautiful performances. They weren't fantastic production, but his availability still placed him as the RB6 because of his overall collection of fantasy points. And when his ADP is in the mid to late 4th round, it's too good of a value to pass on that still I've got him in the RB1 bubble. For that reason, I think he's best in redraft formats where you can kind of set your lineup on a week-to-week basis. But at the end of the day, I'll take Zeke as my steady Eddie running back, and I think that he's got opportunity to exceed his draft day expectations this season. So let's slap James Conner up here in the RB1 bubble as well for this season. Now, the Cardinals did just bring in Darrell Williams, the former Kansas City Chief, who had 57 targets, I want to say. It was either 53 or 57 targets a season ago for KC. I think that's significant, but what I do think here is that James Conner has a wide open door to being a workhorse for the entire season this year, whereas last year he had to pretty much overcome Chase Edmonds. Chase Edmonds was the starter for this team. Now, he was definitely more of a scat back, and we saw early on once this team would get in the red zone, James Conner would come in. They'd get Chase Edmonds the heck off the field. And, that's why he was one of the NFL touchdown leaders with 18 rushing TDs, or total TDs rather. It is a total touchdown machine. He did barely just have 1,100 yards from scrimmage, so it's not like, and again, the context behind that goes back to the fact that he was really in an even situation with Chase Edmonds for the first half of the season or so. But late in the year, he really emerged as a pass-catching option. Once Chase Edmonds missed a couple of games, you saw James Conner come in and really show what he could do as a pass catcher, multiple kind of insane one-handed grabs in the middle of the field. And I think he proved to the coaching staff why he deserves to be a three-down back for this team. So Chase Edmonds' departure, he's heading to Miami now, will likely start as the lead back there. We'll see what ends up happening. I would not be surprised if Sony Michel or Raheem Mostert cut out a very significant piece of that pie there. But he vacates 53 targets. Now, not all of those are going to James Conner. Some will go to Darrell Williams, I'm sure. Some will trickle into other places. But the point being is you've got a fantastic opportunity with a complete player with goal line potential to get you a lot of those valuable carries. So Leonard Fournette, the next name I want to talk about today, third in running back targets this season ago, third in red zone touches, 84 targets and 54 red zone touches. Those are great numbers, better than I expected to be in both categories. And I think what that boils down to is, the coaching staff last season lost trust in Ronald Jones very quickly. That led to a lot more opportunities for Leonard Fournette. And then you've got Tom Brady leading, a top 5. I don't know exactly off the top of my head where Tampa finished in terms of offensive production, but a top 5 offense in the National Football League, again, led by the GOAT. You're going to have efficiency, opportunities in the red zone. All that great stuff is kind of a package deal here as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. So I think it works out great for Leonard Fournette. They brought in Rachaad White as a third-round draft pick this year. I expect him to have some involvement, but I think that this is Leonard Fournette's show until something is to happen significantly. We're talking like injury or some other issue. I don't see Rachaad White really hindering his fantasy value too much. We're seeing Fournette's ADP actually rise right now steadily just because of the opportunity that's there. Now, in dynasty formats, again, Rachaad White's kind of lurking there in the background of the picture, but in the window of the 2022 season, I think Fournette is still a fantastic fantasy option. And then the last name I want to talk about here on the RB1 bubble is Nick Chubb. So Nick Chubb has been fantastic. I kind of, said that steady Eddie thing about Zeke, but Nick Chubb is an even better example of that. This is not a guy who has a elite snap count percentage, an elite workhorse level volume in terms of encompassing receiving and rushing value. This is a guy who does his work pretty much all on the ground and does not give you very much as a receiver. That's why he's on the bubble here. The efficiency Nick Chubb has to bring to the table as a rusher has to be a level higher than any other player because you've got a Kareem Hunt coming in, taking value in the receiving game and carries for that matter. Goal line touches as well. He was vulturing a lot of touchdowns last season. You've got Demetric Felton back there, Jerome Ford now. This is not a situation where Nick Chubb has a monopoly on all the carries in Cleveland's backfield, and this is probably going to be a team with very positive game scripts next year if Deshaun Watson can be the player we know him to be, but I'm still a bit worried about this. Nick Chubb has had, in the last 3 years from 2019 to 2021, 2 top 10 finishes in fantasy points per game, and his highest was a 7th finish in fantasy points per game. So, again, those are nice numbers, but you're not getting elite level production from him. Again, he is that steady Eddie RB1 type player. He was 54th in targets at the running back position, so not great there in PPR leagues especially. I'm going to kind of take a back seat and stay away a little bit. And the really troubling thing to me, and it made sense watching Cleveland games last year, is he only had a 51.7% snap share. So you're talking about a guy who I had concerns with Javonte Williams at 49.9. Nick Chubb's 51.7 is not that much higher. And that, again, is attributed to Kareem Hunt's involvement, Demetric Felton. This year they draft Jerome Ford. We'll see how those guys boil in, and those last two players are not going to be super significant factors. Excuse me. And if they are, I'd be kind of shocked. But they're eating into value and production nonetheless. So I could see a world where if he doesn't have these ridiculously efficient per rush numbers and rips off these explosive runs up the middle of the field, you could have some issues here. And that's something that I'm going to be mindful of this season and looking to stay away a respectable amount. So now getting into the RB2s category, the first name I want to put up is Aaron Jones. Now, I've seen a lot of players have Aaron Jones highly on their, or ranked highly on their rankings list, or, consider him as a fringe RB1 for this upcoming season. But despite the fact that I love the situation, his numbers in the receiving game have been phenomenal without Devontae Adams in the field. We'll see how sustainable those roughly 6.5 to 7 targets per game without Adams on the field from 2019 to last season. We'll see how sustainable those are when Adams is out of the weekly game plan on a weekly basis. But you've also got A.J. Dillon here. So, and you bring in Christian Watson, Sammy Watkins. It's kind of a muddy fantasy outlook for this entire Packers team. And as a Packer fan, I watch every single Packer game. I'm very, involved with watching the games and looking extra closely at this team. And it's still quite a bit of a mystery as it goes as far as, what is this team going to do? Again, Aaron Rodgers loves throwing the football to Aaron Jones. Look no further than the last game they played against San Francisco. Aaron Jones was the leading receiver for the Packers in that contest. And you've got a player who has had elite RB1 finishes. He's been an RB1 in fantasy points per game 3 separate occasions. He's had 10-plus touchdowns, again, 3 separate occasions. And he's been the former RB2 and the RB6 in season-long finish. So you've got a guy with the skill set. His comparisons and his skill set give him elite-level upside. But then the thing that gives me hesitancy, despite the fact that he should be scheduled for a receiving game increase, is the fact that A.J. Dillon is a capable receiver. He's a guy that can take red zone targets, red zone touches rather, goal line opportunities, all that stuff. And even though Aaron Jones had 47 red zone touches this past season and 52 receptions, which again are fantastic numbers in both categories, A.J. Dillon can do that stuff as well. And it's just going to come down to how the staff wants to break up those opportunities and touches. I think that they should prioritize both backs. I think both backs should be fantasy relevant, even to a greater extent than a Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon pairing. If I were to place a bet which running back duo would have the higher fantasy output, I'd probably put my money on the Packers, for the sole fact that I think that their second option, A.J. Dillon's a bit better than Melvin Gordon right now. But we'll see what happens there. I think that the offense has phenomenal production potential still, despite the fact that they don't have Devontae. They're going to need to use their other skilled playmakers in ways to get them the football out in space and obviously scoring points. So I think the opportunity will be there. It's just going to really determine how they want to use them and incorporate that situation heading into 2022. Saquon's another RB2 for me this year. Definitely think he could finish as an RB1, but for what my expectation is right now and the size of the group in the RB1 bubble as it is, his ADP is still a value. He's going as a third-round pick right now in 12-team leagues, and he's got rare athleticism. I mean, we've still got concerns about the ACL for some reason that I think are affecting his draft stock. I mean, there's guys, very, very talented players like Cooper Kupp, your wide receiver one from last season, formerly tore his ACL, but I think the Giant situation is scaring players as well. But I don't think people realize that he averaged 24 points per game in his rookie season, and in PPR was the RB1 in 2018. So, I mean, this is a guy, and that situation, I will add, was worse than the situation I believe he's walking into here in 2022. And that's one of the arguments I made for last year as well. It was that the situation is improving. It's taking steps forward in a positive direction. It's getting better. It's still not fantastic. I mean, it's not a Austin Eckler situation or a Jonathan Taylor situation by any means. But the talent is there again, the freakish athleticism. He's just got to stay healthy, and he's just got to do what he's capable of doing. And if that's possible, I see no reason that Saquon can't finish easily in the 12 to 16 range for this upcoming season. And if he plays the majority of the contests, I think that he will finish as a fringe RB1 level player as opposed to an RB2. David Montgomery is another guy I want to toss in this category. Now, for me, David brings all the skills and the tools to the table to be an RB1, but the situation is not there yet. I think that Chicago offensively took steps backwards this season, which is not what you want to hear if you're a Bears fan. But you lose Allen Robinson, and you didn't really do much to help Justin Fields besides drafting Velus Jones, who is a rookie and already 25 years of age, by the way. And on top of that, the offensive line is very, very average at best. And I don't think that there's very much to work with here. I think the ceiling is very capped. I think that Justin Fields is a phenomenal player. I'm a big fan of him personally. But, again, how much are they going to ask that kid to do? And despite the fact that David Montgomery's volume is fantastic, he had a 74.8% snap share, which is really, really high for the running back position. He's got 50 red zone looks, so that's where you're talking about being tied with the Joe Mixon and Ezekiel Elliott category. So he's getting red zone opportunities, but he still only scored 7 total touchdowns last year because this team is not getting in the end zone and scoring a high output of points on a week-to-week basis. So there's really only so much he can do until Chicago takes that next step forward. He had a really hot ending to 2020, but I think that was more of a fluke and just kind of a situational outburst than it was something to be expected and projected over the long-term course of a season. And that's what I'll be wary of and mindful of when talking David Montgomery this fantasy season. Now, next up, we're going to talk about Elijah Mitchell. He will also go into this RB2 category. He's been classified by 49ers reporters, beat writers, whatever you want to call them, as the lead back, and they were assured that he is the primary option in the running department for the San Francisco 49ers. However, I do have my concerns. I think he's easily a player who is, hanging on by a thread between being there and in the RB2 bubble right now for me. You never trust a Kyle Shanahan running back. And right now, I think that Elijah Mitchell's ADP is a bit too high for my liking personally. He's a talented player. He had some nice performances last season. And again, as the lead running back in San Francisco, you're going to be penciled in for some massive gains. But he was only RB14 in points per game last season, so finishing as an RB2 in that department. Only played 11 games in his rookie season. That's a bit worrisome for me because Kyle Shanahan's going to run his running backs into the ground. And if you're missing 6 games in a given season, that gives the opportunity for someone else, like a Raheem Mostert, previously, obviously he's in Miami now, or this season, Tyron Davis-Price, to come in, crush it, smash it, and eat your workload up, and boom, into irrelevancy. So that's my scare for Elijah Mitchell this season. Very hesitant with drafting him. If he falls well below his ADP, I'll scoop him up because I think he's a good player. But again, I'm a little bit worried. Only 6 touchdowns last year. That number seems low for a 49ers running back. I just think that the volume that they're getting when they are the lead back should, net a higher number than that. But we'll see. I'd be very happy if he exceeds my expectations, proves me wrong, and goes from there this upcoming year. Now, everyone else, these final 6 players are in the RB2 bubble. Now, I'll explain either my optimism or my skepticism here with each player. Travis Etienne is someone I'm very optimistic about, but just being realistic, I'm putting him in the RB2 bubble. He's into a situation where with James Robinson's Achilles injury and the fact that I think that he won't be able to handle a lot of volume or play efficiently, I think Etienne's going to see a lot of work early on. Doug Peterson's lead running back sees 4 or more opportunities in the passing game on a per-game basis, which is fantastic for a former first-round draft pick, a guy who has highly coveted fantasy football skills, and a guy who's being tied to his college football quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. I think the situation is great. We'll just see what happens. Travis Etienne obviously did not play last year, was held out because of the Liz Frank injury. Leg issues are not what you want to see with the running back. But I do think he should get a very valuable opportunity to start and prove himself here to start 2022. Cam Akers plays in an offense that situationally sets him up for success. I expect this team to be highly effective moving the football downfield from Cooper Kupp to A-Rob, who's going to be a beast this year. Go check out my YouTube short on him. Again, if you guys are enjoying today's episode, make sure to drop down, click that subscribe button, and like today's video. Obviously subscribe if you're new around here, but if not, thank you guys so much for sticking around the community. But Cam Akers has an offense that has the chance to crush it again this season. It's going to come down to how healthy he can be, because I still don't think for the first 4 to 8 games of the season he's going to be playing at 100%. He came back insanely fast from that Achilles tear and was available for the Super Bowl. Obviously played in those games, helped the Rams win it, but was terribly efficient, did not look like himself, and was not the same player that he was down the stretch of his rookie season or at FSU. So health is the concern for Cam Akers there. And just the fact that Sean McVay doesn't really have a true workhorse. He will divvy up carries to other players. Antonio Gibson, someone I'm fading super low on for this season. So Gibson's numbers, he only had a 56.3% snap share, which is not terrible, but it's not fantastic. For a guy who was a former wide receiver at Memphis, you expect receiving skill set to be highly coveted here at the next level. Only 22nd in targets a season ago. You've got J.D. McKissic eating up a lot of passing volume in that offense, which is not ideal again. And then you've got a guy in Brian Robinson coming in this season who is a phenomenal pass protector, which I think is going to get him on the field for third down situations to block for Carson Wentz, who, if he's under pressure, he's going to throw a reckless football downfield. And you've got a guy who, in third and short situations or goal line opportunities, I think will get just as much work as Antonio Gibson will get this season. So I've got two guys digging the shovel here, taking away valuable touches that I want nothing to do with. Don't take my opportunities in the passing game and on the goal line if I'm an Antonio Gibson owner, especially in Dynasty. I feel for you guys. I was high as heck on Gibson when McKissic was supposed to sign with Buffalo and pre-Brian Robinson draft choice. I think we're rolling, baby. This is golden. You've got the skill set, the size. You've got a situation for volume. It's all set up for beautiful success. And then boom, boom, boom. We get brutally humbled back into our seats. And as Antonio Gibson, I'm not an Antonio Gibson owner in Dynasty, and I haven't drafted a share of him in redraft or best ball this season. But I can tell you this, I'll be staying away now because despite the fact, again, that he checks the box in the talent, the size, the skill set departments, situationally, I want nothing to do with that Washington offense. Josh Jacobs is on the bubble here as well. You've got Kenyon Drake coming back from injury. You've got Zamir White, the first draft pick at the running back position by the new Raiders regime. I'm not going to panic too much. I think that it's more likely that Josh Jacobs finishes in the RB2 territory. So, running backs 12 through 18 or so. These bubble guys are kind of 19 through 24. Could finish lower. I just think that for a guy who has lacking explosiveness, is having competition in the receiving game, especially from Kenyon Drake, but doesn't really flash elite upside, in my opinion. I think he would need the absence of one of those players to really get elite volume. The opportunity he does have to finish even higher than the expectations, though, is the introduction of Devontae Adams and the potential that has for a jump in ceiling for the Raiders football team. So I like Josh Jacobs. I hope he produces well this season. In 2023, I am a little bit afraid for his job since they have not committed to him via extension or fifth-year option, which is, I think the window for that's closed. They declined to pick it up, so that will not be happening. Yeah, Josh Jacobs gives me some hesitancy and some worry there. J.K. Dobbins is a player who I think is ridiculously talented, insanely explosive, awesome player, awesome prospect. Was super excited about him last season, and here we go. ACL tear, very unfortunate, and the Ravens kind of have somewhat of a committee-style offense. So you've got guys like Tyler Beatty, who was drafted this season. You've got Gus Bus Edwards returning from injury, although he's going to probably be hampered a little bit in terms of his overall health as well. Mike Davis came in. We'll see if he makes the roster, but he was signed by Baltimore. So you've got guys with different skill sets, different traits that will likely be implementing different, use cases and just being utilized in different ways. Is simple. It doesn't need to be more simple than that. And so I wonder I doubt that JK can be a workhorse running back in terms of being a 20-plus touch per game player. I think he can be insanely explosive, insanely efficient. I mean, you're going to see or need to see some similarities between a J.K. Dobbins and a Nick Chubb if you're going to see J.K. smash on his ADP. Well, not necessarily his ADP, but on his upside, at times ADP as well. But it's not a great situation overall, and again, coming off of a significant injury always gives you a little bit of doubt. And then Breece Hall, I would love to put higher on the list here. What it comes down to is uncertainty. I think the upside, the ceiling is sky high. I think he's the best running back in this year's draft class. You've got a guy with workhorse level size, 4.39 speed, explosiveness out in space. The opportunity to be used as a workhorse for New York is going to depend on how they implement Michael Carter in the receiving game, because I personally feel that Breece Hall as a rushing threat is by far the best option on this football team. But Michael Carter has, a really interesting stat I saw on Twitter the other day, is he had 7 targets per game without Zach Wilson on the football field, and with Zach Wilson, he only had 2.3 targets per game. So as someone who was initially anticipating a vulturing of targets out of the backfield that could be going Breece Hall's way, and instead it would be going towards Michael Carter, we'll see how that dynamic gets divvied up and shaken out here, since Zach Wilson did not typically tend to target Michael Carter at a high level this past season. So I think Breece can be a workhorse. We'll see. That's why he's in the bubble, because at the end of the day, the Jets as a situation could blow up, turn into a big, inefficient, disastrous mess, and we could see their entire offense crumble. It all depends on how Zach Wilson plays and if they're able to continue taking positive steps in the right direction. So those are my top 24 running back tiers. Screenshot it, whatever you want to do, make note of it. I'll be updating these rankings. Obviously, if you want the numeric ranking values, you can find those on my website, sizzlefantasy.com. The link to that is in the description of today's episode. You can get access to the whole site, redraft guide, dynasty guide, rankings, exclusive articles, literally everything for just $5 a month. Not much you can get for $5 these days, but you can get the SFS draft guide. Or if you stick around till next week, I'll have another opportunity to get that access for the entirety of this summer in a separate deal, if you will. So stay tuned for that. Go check out the SFS community Discord server. I can't wait to pop up with some videos at the top of next week for you guys. But I'm going to take the weekend here, make some updates on the website, put some more content in there offline, and then I'll come back at you next Monday. So thank you guys so much for watching. Remember, if you're new around here, drop down, click that subscribe button, share the SFS channel with your friends, and let's have a great fantasy football season together. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.